Okay, we're going to look at fractions, decimals, and percents. And just wanted to get a bit of foundation going first. So what I'd like you to do is just look at this square here. And can you figure out how many little squares are in this big square? First of all, let's just take this yellow square. How many little squares are in the yellow square, right? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. So that's 5 times 5, right? So how many little yellow squares? Would that be 25? How about red squares? How many red squares? Is that the same size? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 25 here, right? How about blue squares? How many blue squares? How many white squares? So do we have 25 of each? So how many altogether? How many squares altogether? 25, 50, 75, 100, right? So I have 100 little squares, and that's really useful. What I'd like you to do is think about a fraction 1/2, okay? Now 1/2 would be, let's say, just this, well, let's say just the top part, the yellow and the red, okay? That would be 1/2. And how many little squares is 1/2 of this big, of the full box? How many little squares would the yellow and red together make? 1/2 of it, right? That's a half, isn't it? Or there'd be 50 little squares, right? So that is really useful. That is 50 out of 100, okay? Now this is what we can use to easily figure out the decimal and the percent, right? Because 50 out of 100 is 50 hundredths, okay? Now 50 hundredths as a decimal is 0.50, 0.50. Can you write that a simpler way? 0.5, right? So that's converting it to a decimal. Now, as a percent, per means divide, and cent means, well, what do you think cent means? It's a Latin word. There are 100 years in a century, okay? There are 100 cents in a dollar. Cent means 100, okay? So per cent means basically divide by 100, right? Or out of 100, per 100, right? So we have 50 little squares per 100, and we write that as a percent, 50%, okay? So that is 1/2. Here's the fraction. Here's the decimal. Here's the percentage. And do you understand that? Right? So I'd like you to take a look at 1/4. Just what is 1/4? How many little squares out of 100? Because this box here has 100 little squares in it. Okay. 1/4 of this box would be what? Let's say the yellow squares. Okay. So how many little squares out of 100 is 1/4? How many yellows do we have? We say we have 25, right? Okay. Now 25 hundredths is what we have, 25 out of 100. How would you write that as a decimal? .25, right? 25 hundredths. And as a percentage, again, we have 25 out of 100. 25 per 100. And the way to write that is simply 25%. So can you see that 1/4 is 0.25, and it's also 25%, right? So what I'd like you to do for me is on your own do 3/4. I want you to figure out how many squares out of little squares out of 100 that is. Okay, and then I'd like you to give me the decimal and the percentage for 3/4. How many little squares out of 100? So 3/4, right? So each one of, like, the yellows, that's 1/4. The reds, that's another quarter. That would be 2/4, right? The blues, that's another quarter. That would be 3/4. And the whites would be 4/4, right? So how many little squares would 3/4 be? How many, if you had 3/4 of a dollar, how many cents is that? 3/4 of a dollar. Is that 75 cents? 75 out of 100, right? Now write that as a decimal and then as a percent. 75 out of 100 would be 0.75, 75 hundredths. And percent means per hundred. How many per hundred do we have? We have 75 out of 100. 75%, right? So 3/4 is 0.75, and it's also 75%, right? So we just wanted to do a little bit of basics just so we can see what's going on. Now, what I want you to notice is, let's notice one thing. Where's the decimal point here? Well, I guess we'll go ahead and start on question 1 and chat about that. But 3/4 we just figured out as a decimal 0.75, as a percent 75%. Okay.